The Jones family were travelling in a caravan in Ireland on their way to see great Aunt Rosie Ryan. On Blackfeagle's bog, they rescued a man trapped in the mud, who turned out to be Mr. Plunkett, a local factory owner. To thank them, he invited them back for a meal at his house in Glasshaven. But as they entered the harbour, they gazed in wonder at a giant iceberg out to sea. It was too cold to stay on the dockside, all wet and muddy as they were, so Mr. Plunkett took the Jones family to his house so that Arabelle and her father could get washed and changed out of their muddy clothes. Even Mortimer was pleased to take a shower. Mr. Plunkett got the garden boy to take the Joneses' clothes to the laundrette and urged his housekeeper to cook a feast for the preservers who'd saved him from the bog. Well, when Arabelle and her father were dry and warm, they all walked to Mr. Plunkett's factory, which was on the harbour side. By the water, it seemed even colder. A freezing breeze blew towards them from the iceberg, which was drifting in with the tide coming closer and closer to land. By now, it was well after tea time, and the sun was low in the western sky, shining in sideways through the factory windows, which were very large and clear. As they came into the main workshop, Arabelle gave a gasp, and so did Mrs. Jones, who quickly dived a hand into her pink raffia handbag, found her sunglasses, and clapped them on her nose. For there was such a flashing and a sparkling and such a shining, dazzling, spangling, bright, shimmering luminousness all about that for several minutes the visitors could hardly see anything whatsoever. All they could do was stand and blink. "Ark!" whispered Mortimer. "Blow me," said Mr. Jones.
"Oh, Mortimer, isn't it beautiful?" said Arabelle.
For Mr. Plunkett's factory was a glass factory. There were cut glass tumblers and salad bowls and great round brandy glasses like balloons. There were glass plates and glass clocks and shimmering rows of glass wind bells like organ pipes. There were rose bowls and wine glasses and sherry glasses. There were cut glass perfume flasks and powder bowls and delicate twisted long-stemmed flower holders. There were glass finger bowls and pitchers and goblets and candlesticks. The light from the setting sun caught all the edges of the cut glass and threw millions of different coloured sparks everywhere. Arabelle had purple freckles all over her face. Mortimer had a lemon-yellow waistcoat. And the smooth glass all around them shimmered and shone and dazzled like a whole forest full of decorated Christmas trees. Mr. Plunkett began telling them how they cut the patterns on the cut glass. In the old days, of course, they used diamonds to cut the designs, but now we are much more up-to-date and we use laser beams," said Mr. Plunkett.
"Laser beams," said Arabelle, obviously very interested. "Could I see your laser beam, Mr. Plunkett?"
"Bless your heart, and isn't it a fair caution you are, as interested and sensible as a grown person? The laser beam is here." Mr. Plunkett took a cover off. "'Tis like a giant camera on a turntable. Now, we put a bit of glassware in the jaws, and then switch on the beam, and then you can write a pattern on the glass, easy as with a pencil on a piece of paper. Look now, Acushla, I'll get you some glass and I'll guide your hand, and then you can write your name on the glass." So Mr. Plunkett did, and then Arabelle, with great care and only a little wiggly, wrote Arabelle on a tumbler, and Mortimer, breathing heavily, leaned over her shoulder and watched.
"Oh, please, now can I draw a picture of Mortimer on another glass?" pleaded Arabelle. "He would like that."
"Sure indeed, and you can," said Mr. Plunkett. And he tucked another glass into the jaws of the machine. Now, these were covered with velvet to prevent the glass from slipping out. Arabelle had drawn pictures of Mortimer so often it was very easy for her to trace an outline of his big, hairy beak, his feathery wings, his boot-button eyes, his long tail, his untidy trousers, and his sharp, horny claws.
"There,"
she'd finished.
"there you are, Mortimer, on the glass."
Mortimer looked over Arabelle's shoulder and saw his portrait cut on the glass. And at that, he was so amazed, he drew a deep breath and yelled out, "Nevermore!" at the top of his terrifically loud, hoarse, croaking voice. Now, a high note played on a violin can shatter a drinking glass, and a blast blown on a trumpet can knock down a wall, and a peal of bells can break a mirror, and in exactly the same way, Mortimer's shout of "Nevermore" shattered every single piece of glass in the workshop. Fragments and splinters fell about everywhere. Sparks twinkled and shards tinkled. Never before was there such a clinking and clanking, flashing and crashing, glittering and twangling, jingling and jangling. "Good grief," said Mr. Plunkett. and all his workmen were saying similar things.
Oh, glory be to goodness. Mercy on us, who'd have thought it?
Did you ever see anything the equal to that? Sure, and the bird must be the devil himself.
Oh, Mortimer, sighed Arabelle. Look what you've done.
Even Mortimer was quite startled and abashed. He gazed around him at the sparkling wreckage with his big blackberry eyes. He muttered to himself thoughtfully and poked with his claw at a fragment of shining glass that happened to be lying nearby. The only article in the whole place still remaining unbroken as it happened was the tumbler on which Arabelle had drawn Mortimer's picture. That was still clasped in the velvet jaws of the laser machine. Mrs. Jones gulped. Mr. Jones had turned quite pale. "Oh, dear," he began. "Ah, no, don't you be giving that a single thought," said Mr. Plunkett quickly. "Sure, and the bird meant no harm. Now, he doesn't know his own potentiality. 'Tis me own fault for fetching a raven into a glass factory. Ah, bless you, the insurance will be paying for it. Don't be worrying your heads about this little mishap at all." Just the same, the horrified Jones family felt that the best thing they could do was to get out of the factory, out of the town of Glasshaven, and be on their way. But at this moment, everybody was distracted by one of the glass blowers who came rushing to the workshop door, calling out,
Will you all be casting a look at the iceberg now? It's drifting clean into the harbour, and begorra, it has a great beast inside it like a starfish in a paperweight. 'Tis the greatest sight this town has seen since the French landed.
Well, at this, everybody, scrunching over the piles of broken glass on the floor, ran to the big factory window to stare out over the harbour. "Faith," said Mr. Plunkett, "did you ever see the lake? 'Tis like a ship in a bottle."
And others said, "Oh, 'tis like a chick in a glass egg. 'Tis like a nut in a shell or a stone in a plum." Well, what manner of creature might that be at all, then? Sure, its tail is longer than the racecourse at Fairy House, and its neck is almost as long. Do you suppose it's dead, or perhaps frozen alive?
"Live or dead," said Mr. Plunkett. "If that chunk of ice isn't halted before it hits our dockside, there'll be little left of the port of Glasshaven or this factory either. What yon bird achieved will be but a pennyworth of damage compared with this one." Well, at these words of warning, everybody began to look very worried indeed.
"Oh, mercy on us, what'll we ever do at all?" somebody wailed. "If that thing hits the town, every soul in it will be turned to meat paste." "Mortimer, I believe it's a dinosaur in there," whispered Arabelle. "You see, its long tail and its long neck. Don't you wish that somebody would break the iceberg and let it out?"
"Nevermore," muttered Mortimer, a little doubtfully. Well, it was then that Arabelle had her good idea.
"Mr. Plunkett," she said timidly, "don't you think that perhaps the laser machine could break the iceberg?"
"Glory be on high. 'Tis pure genius that's in the child entirely," roared Mr. Plunkett. He dashed back to the laser box, spun it around until it was pointing towards the window, and he shouted, "Duck, everybody!" And he switched the volume up to full power and directed the beam straight towards the approaching iceberg. There was a moment of hush while everybody held their breath. First, the window melted and curled up like tissue paper on a hot fire. Then, with a majestic, grating, squeaking, crunching rumpus, like the sound of a branch splitting off a tree, only 1,000,000 times more so, the iceberg fell in half.
"Oh, the dinosaur!"
cried Arabelle in dismay, for the dinosaur, freed from its container, had sunk stiffly into the deep water of the bay and disappeared. Now Mr. Plunkett was rapidly running his laser beam back and forth over the two halves of the iceberg, chopping them into smaller and smaller bits. "There," he said, switching off the laser beam. "Thanks be to Providence and the child's good thinking. Now we can all rest easy."
"Oh, but Mr. Plunkett, a dinosaur," said Arabelle urgently. "Don't you think somebody ought to fish the poor thing up out of the water?"
"Ah, Lana, that dinosaur has been frozen inside the iceberg for more million years than you have fingers, and toes too, likely. It won't hurt him at all to wait at the bottom of our fine, clean harbour for a little. Now, I'm sure you all want your dinners. I do mine. I'll let you be coming this way now." All the way up the wide, sloping main street of Glasshaven, Arabelle kept looking wistfully back at the waters of the harbour. And so she was the first to see the dinosaur heave itself out of the water and step over the cliff top. It was like watching a horse climb out of a hand basin. There seemed to be so much dinosaur and so little water.
"Oh, Mortimer," breathed Arabelle for the second time that day. "Isn't it beautiful?"
"Ah," said Mortimer thoughtfully. It was a greenish grey. Its hind legs were bigger than its forelegs. Its teeth stuck outside its jaw and tidily, and its eyes were very small. Standing dripping on the cliff top, it didn't seem quite certain what to do next. It swung its head doubtfully on the long, long neck, gazed for a while at the town of Glasshaven lying below it like mustard and cress. Then everyone watched it turn inland, striding away over the grassy hills.
"Maybe we should be going after it, the creature," said Tom Foyle, the harbour master, a little dubiously. "The folks of Derry Cahar and Killinore may not be best pleased to have a dinosaur come lepping up the road." So the whole population of Glasshaven ran up to the top of the hill in order to see what the dinosaur was going to do next. And from that lookout point, everybody was relieved to see that it hadn't taken the road to Derry Cahar and Killinore, but was walking straight inland. The dinosaur suddenly threw up its head and let out a long, loud, wailing cry. Such a sound as had not echoed over the world for millions of years. "Poor thing, I believe it's lonely,"
said Arabelle sadly, as it went plodding on its way.
"The beast is heading for Blackfeagle's bog," said Tom Foyle. "Maybe somebody should warn it. 'Twould be a shame if the only dinosaur to visit this part this century would go and walk into a bog now, certainly before the Glasshaven Gazette had been taking its photograph."
But he spoke too late. For while the people of Glasshaven held their breaths upon the grassy hillside, their great visitor began striding over the distant brown flatness of Blackfeagle's bog. As he went on, he sank lower and lower into the soft, oozy ground. At last, his head was the only part of him visible, ploughing along like the periscope of a submarine. Suddenly the head rose up, as if for a last look round. Then it sank from view entirely. "Well, indeed, now, and that surely rid us of an awkward problem," said Mr. Plunkett, much relieved. "Come along home now, let you, Mrs. and Mrs. Jones and Arabelle, you must be starving for your suppers." So they went back to Mr. Plunkett's house, and they ate boxty, dillisk, stelk, frumenty and carrageen moss, all of which were delicious. Mr. Jones was still worrying about the broken glass in the factory, but Mr. Plunkett said, "Never give it a thought, man dear. If that darling child of yours hadn't had the grand notion of using the laser beam on the iceberg, there'd have been a deal more damage than that." Said Mortimer, sadly. "What ails the bird?" inquired Mr. Plunkett. "Does he not like the frumenty?"
"I'm afraid he's thinking about the glass with his picture on it. We left it in the factory."
"Well, he can have it this very minute. I'll send the garden boy down for it directly." And so Mortimer was able to go to bed in Mr. Plunkett's coal scuttle, with the glass wrapped lovingly between his wings. Next day, the Jones family resumed their journey towards Great Aunt Rosie in Castle Coffee. But before that, they drove back with Mr. Plunkett in his car to see if there were any traces remaining of the dinosaur in Blackfeagle's bog. There were none, or only one. The bog had settled itself back into place, brown, flat, and gooey as before. But on the little rocky hill in the middle, there were now 2 footprints, and a flock of large pink butterflies could be seen fluttering above it.
"Maybe the dinosaur will come up again sometime, Mortimer," said Arabelle. "Maybe found a friend under there."
Said Mortimer. He wasn't really interested in the dinosaur. All he wanted to do was to sit gazing at the picture of himself on the glass. Goodbye.
BBC4's series looking at the illustrated literature of our childhood, Picture Book, concludes with a brand new episode right here on Wednesday at 9. Next tonight, In Session with the Mod Father.